If you ever feel like you're putting serious effort into your creative pursuits but not really connecting with people, this is for you. You're not alone. I think what it's really about is that we're not telling our story, or maybe just not telling it well enough. The other day, I was standing in front of an audience with my band, and I was introducing one of my new compositions. This one was actually so new that it didn't have a title, and I stood there trying to think of something to say, and then it hit me that if this piece didn't mean enough to me to name it, how could I expect any of these people to care about it? People want to be let in. They want to peek around the curtain and get a glimpse of what's inspiring the work. And that's exactly the thing that allows that connection to form, our story. One of the most powerful tools we have as creatives is story. It's maybe the oldest art form we have. It's how humans have passed down wisdom through the generations. Depending on what we do, our creative work often requires us to go through the motions of our craft, telling someone else's story, or foregoing story altogether, just producing work that maybe does nothing for us but pays the bills. Sometimes it's like that, but we can't let that be the norm. And that's why this week I want to focus on telling our stories and the various ways we can do that. We have to make room in our creative pursuits for work that somehow tells our story. I saw a video the other day from the Dutch photographer Valerie Spaniers, who was talking about exactly this problem. She became successful as a freelance photographer and videographer in the Netherlands, but as busy as she was, she felt like something was missing. So she made the decision to say no to a lot of work that she wouldn't have hesitated to take before. And this is actually incredibly similar to my own story. I've been writing music since before I really knew how, but I became busy as a drummer, often playing other people's music, which is wonderful. Actually, I'm incredibly grateful for that. But at a certain point, I started asking myself, what's the plan here? Like, when am I going to follow this voice in my head telling me to do my own thing? It's scary though. Saying no to someone is terrifying for any creative person. The idea that people are going to stop booking you is a hard pill to swallow. And this doesn't have to mean never working for other people again, but maybe just making sure you have an outlet for your own ideas, for your own story. We can do more than one thing at a time. We can do work for other people and find a certain satisfaction in that, but we also need to make room for our own story somewhere in our creative pursuits. This can be something as simple as keeping a journal or a sketchbook, or having a pet project just for your own enjoyment. But I think in order to really scratch the itch, we need to do something public. We need to hit publish in whatever way applies to us. In my case, it's about releasing recordings and booking gigs. But if you're a designer, it could be having a book of your own work printed. If you're a filmmaker, putting something up on YouTube, or if you're a writer, posting something online, maybe on Medium, or maybe self-publishing a book. Whatever makes sense for your creative field, you need to put yourself out there. But we also need to understand that this is not just for our own benefit. People need to come in contact with our work. And maybe that sounds weird to say, but I mean it. If we feel compelled to create, I think we have a duty to share it with the world. And if we're good enough at our craft that others want to hire us to fulfill their own vision, we can't forget the reason we're doing it to begin with. Our story wants to be told. That is a pure and honorable pursuit. It's not something to shy away from or make excuses about and put off. Of course, things are going to come up that cause us to shift our focus and take projects that pay the bills. But we can't forget that the original calling is still there, waiting to be answered. So when I say tell your story, I'm not talking exclusively about your life story. This doesn't have to be all about you personally. I mean, it certainly can be. There's nothing wrong with that. But anything that inspires us is part of our story. The fact that I love Kenny Wheeler's music makes writing a piece dedicated to him part of my own story. Or writing a piece about the dark months in Iceland is obviously part of my story. That was a struggle for me when we first moved here, and really still kind of is. Turns out sunlight is pretty important. But these are examples that reference something specific from my life. It doesn't need to be that obvious. It can be abstract. Sometimes the parts of our story aren't things we're even necessarily aware of, but if the work is sincere, we can feel a connection with what we're doing that goes beyond something that we can explain with words. That being said, we each have a story that wants to be told. There are things in our lives that others can learn from, that we can actually learn from ourselves by revisiting them in our work. We have to excavate our past for the lessons that are worth learning. Storytelling is, after all, first and foremost about communicating survival skills. I think about the movie Whiplash sometimes, about the drummer in New York who is completely obsessed with rising to the top at the Manhattan School of Music. That was written and directed by Damien Chazelle, who went through a period of being obsessed with the drums. The movie got a lot of criticism in musician circles for being unrealistic, but I think it's really trying to communicate to up-and-coming musicians that there is more at stake than just the music. Chazelle is telling part of his own story as a way to show us the risks of losing ourselves in pursuit of some idea of excellence. This is an idea that can be applied to any creative field, and he takes it straight out of his own story. But like I said, it doesn't need to be so direct to be part of our story and inspire work that communicates something important. There's the literal interpretation of your story, as in your biography, and then there's the more loose reading, which means that which we feel a connection to. And that's a much more broad definition. We also need to remember that our story is not over. We can certainly mine our past for inspiration, but our present can be fuel for our work even more easily. And in some cases, it can help us work through difficulties in our lives. It can be a form of therapy. But our future can just as easily be fertile ground for inspiration. Our desires, our fears about where the world is heading or how it should be, can all inform our work. This is maybe us telling some version of our story that has yet to unfold. We can take traumatic events and turn them into life lessons, or the fears that we deal with can become the obstacles that we overcome in our creative pursuits. When we become the client, the deliverables can be our own well-being. However you decide to go about it, I hope that you'll consider your own unique story as a source of inspiration and dedicate some time and resources to sharing your version of events with the world. You deserve it, and so do we. Thanks so much for hanging out. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably enjoy the one I did about being your ideal boss, which you should be able to click on here. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow.